So this is a crazy world we live in, y'all. Welcome back to KBLKRadio.com. You are listening to Clovis Honore on the Omnilogue One Love radio program. Thank you for tuning in to the last hour. You know what's interesting? So last hour was the San Diego Black Health Associates Black Health Matters hour. The hour before that was the NAACP hour, and they had Darwin Fishman, and he was interviewing Charlene. I can't think of her last name, but she's the new executive. Well, not new. He keeps saying new. She's not that new, but she's been around a couple years now. She's the executive director of the Citizens Review Board for the City of San Diego for the police department. And prior to that, you had Gigi on. You know, I have a hard time remembering Gigi's real. That's Gigi's real name. Her first name. I call it. I know her as a Gigi. I knew a long time as Gigi. But whoever was on before, you know who was on before that. With the money, talking about Judy. Yeah, Judy Meeks, Judith Meeks, on with the radio show. And we're talking about Black Wall Street. And you know what's interesting? I had the chance today because I had a clear schedule, basically because my wife is out of town, so we didn't go run and do what we usually do between church and this radio show. And so I had a chance to listen in all day long, and it was really interesting that you can't hear nothing like this no place else. This is you got black folk in San Diego on the radio talking about real serious business, and you can't hear this anywhere else, anywhere in the world. You cannot hear what you hear on KBLKRadio.com. We were talking. Judy was talking about what I do with my forum. She was talking about Black Wall Street and this gentleman that she had on. I'll track down his name in just a moment. His name is Frank Weston. Mr. Frank Weston is chairman of the International Multiracial Shared Cultural Organization, also known as IMSCO, IMSCO, IMSCO. Which is a fascinating organization because and some of the stuff they were talking about, and you can go to their website and come listen to their broadcast and get more information. But he basically says this. Look, he says African diaspora descendants of Africans forcibly removed dual citizenship drive to save Africa. Our non-African friends and allies should throw their full support behind dual citizenship to save African lives, and the future depends on to save African lives, and the future depends on it. What he's saying and what they were saying on the program is that we so I know so hang with me for just a minute, listen and see if and just let this settle in a little bit. I know because I came from my Sunday school class at Christian Fellowship this morning, and we have very dynamic opinions in the class, and so it's sometimes hard to let someone finish saying what they're saying before you want to jump in and dialogue, and I appreciate that, and that's a lot of fun. We do that a lot in our Sunday school class at Christian Fellowship Congregational Church. The other side of that, though, is sometimes it's difficult to hear entirely what someone is saying, and especially if we're pre-programmed. I know that's hard for us to appreciate, that we're pre-programmed, that we have automatic reactions to some things because we've been trained to do that. Now I introduced you. I'm backtracking into something, so bear with me. I introduced y'all to a book long time ago called Know Thyself by a PhD psychologist named Naeem Akbar. You can find him on Facebook, online, all that stuff. Naeem Akbar wrote a book called Know Thyself, and I'll get into more of this, but it's primarily predicated upon the assumption, the knowledge, the understanding, the information that African Americans in the United States of America and Africans in the diaspora are descendants from Africa. We actually often use the term people of African descent. Now, when we say that, we know we can trace all the way back to the first humans on Earth and say all of us are of African descent. The challenge is when we begin to tie ourselves to place. And that's a beautiful thing that I see happening with the so-called Native American Indian population right now. And part of the conversation that Judith Meeks, Gigi was having with Mr. Weston, Dr. Weston this morning on her program. When you begin to tie people to the land. At this point on Earth, there really isn't a place, a land, where people can trace back their ancestry so far that we can honestly say that if all the people who were born and raised there were still there, there wouldn't be room for those people. What am I saying? I'm saying if you look at Europeans, and you look at where Europeans are now, so you got Australia, you have Europeans in what we now call the United States of America. You have Europeans in Canada. If you look at these people, we talk about genetics, we talk about people in place. We can say that these are, even though they call themselves Americans now, they're people of European descent. And if we look at Europe right now and say, well, how much land mass is there in Europe? And if we were all the Europeans who live all over the world were to place themselves in the European continent they come from, could they live there? And the answer is yes, of course they could. There is more than enough. So there's a thing, and I should bring this to you, but there's a thing that hit the internet, and so I did some checking because I'm always concerned when people talk about population control. And here's the context, people. Listen to this. Take a city called New York and a place called Manhattan, and ask yourself how many people live in Manhattan per acre or per square mile. How many people live in Manhattan per square mile? Now, if you think about that, you got all those high rises, all those 40, 50, 70, 100-story buildings, all those people living on top of each other. This is true. But if you were to take all the people of the planet, there's 7 billion of us. Now, remember, New York got 10 million people plus. So if you just take Manhattan and what we call the density of Manhattan, and you were to take all the people in the world and put them in a place with the same density, forget about crime and smog and all that. Let's assume we've solved all those problems, and we can have people live in the same density that they live in Manhattan, and they're living there in Manhattan now. Been doing that for decades, for centuries, right? So it's not like this is brand new, some pie in the sky theoretical stuff. Folks are living in Manhattan right now. They're living at a certain density. If we were to take all 7 billion people in the world and have us all live in the same degree of density that they are now living in New York, that they have been doing so for decades. If we were to take all 7 billion people on the planet and put them into a single place with the same density, we would all fit, all 7 billion of us would fit on the island of New Zealand. One island, New Zealand. No, not even Australia. One island, that little island called New Zealand, all 7 billion of us would fit on that island. So when folks tell you the planet is overcrowded, they're just full of it. They're just full of it, right? At the density where people are living right now in New York, we could put everybody. There would be nobody in North America, nobody, no humans in South America, no humans in Africa, no humans in Asia, no humans in Europe, no humans in Australia. All of them would be in New Zealand. All of them at current density. So when people say the planet is overcrowded, they're full of crap. Now, there are some logistical details to deal with. How do you feed those kind of, there's always that. But folks are eating in New York, in downtown New York now. Folks are eating in Manhattan now. They're traveling in New York. They have jobs. They have families, right? So it's not as though it can't be done. It's just a question of how do you get these things done. So that goes back to the question. If all the Europeans on the planet move back to Europe, and if all the Africans in the planet move back to Africa, and if only the indigenous people because remember, the Europeans slaughtered tens, if not hundreds of millions of people between North America and South America. Hundreds of millions. One estimate is 600 million people were slaughtered. This is genocide, right? So the Europeans, right? So if we were to give this land back to the people it belongs to, right? Then you would have Asians in Asia, right? If we trace it way back, right, to where they originally came from, Asians in Asia, right? You'd have Africans in Africa, you'd have Europeans in Europe, and you'd have what we now call indigenous people, because they've done such an effective means of slaughter. You can't find Mayans, you can't find Aztecs, you can't find Olmecs, you can't find Incas, you can't find those populations anymore by themselves. They're all mixed into some other populations that are descendants of them. You can still find Hopi, you can still find Sioux, and you can still find Paiute, and you still can find Kumeyaay. You can still find these populations in small numbers, right? But if we were to just give people back the land, if you begin to place people in their indigenous environment, where we came from, then you would have to say that Africans would be in Africa. People of African descent would be in Africa. Now, we can get into these, what I call specious. Yes, you can look that up too. Specious, S-P-E-C-I-O-U-S. These specious conversations about what about mixed people? And, how many black people are just black? How many Africans are just, okay, I hear that. I ain't having that argument. I'm saying that if you want to identify yourself, if you look like, enough like, right, the people who come from the African continent and you identify with that, then go there. If you look like and identify with philosophically the people from Europe, go there. If you look like and you have genetics and history, right, you have to choose which history you follow. But generally speaking, based on the classifications and differentiations that are being made on this continent, in this culture at this time, African Americans would be in Africa, Asian Americans would be in Asia, so-called Native American Indians would be here on this continent, etc. So the proposition, I did all that to bring you back to here. The proposition being given to us by Mr. Weston and Judy and the folks who were talking about the Black Wall Street and Buy Black and the Black Business Network that is here in San Diego, right? Actually, they started at 3 o'clock when we started, and they'll be going. They started at 2 o'clock, and they'll be going till, I think they're going 2 to 5. I'm gonna try to get over there after the show, and I don't have the details in front of me. I'll get those at the break. What he is saying basically is this. He said, look, since we have this heritage in Africa, and since we were illegally transported from Africa to the so-called Western Hemisphere, to North and South America, and since we were denied and have been excluded from the law and privileges of citizenship in the United States, but since we have 400 years of heritage here in the United States, we should have dual citizenship. Right? We are entitled to citizenship in the United States of America by virtue of birth and place. Right? I was born here. My daddy was born here. My granddaddy was born here. My great granddaddy was born here in the United States. We have worked here. We have established businesses here. We have paid taxes here. You know, there are tens of thousands of folks in my family in the United States of America. We were born here after we were brought here. But by virtue of the fact that we were brought here illegally, that means we still have a stake in Africa. Right? That there's some place in Africa where we still have citizenship because we never renounced our citizenship in Africa. We were simply stolen. Right? So there's a country now called Benin. It used to be a kingdom there called Dahomey. My father's side of the family comes from Haiti. The vast majority, something like 80 or 90% of the folks who ended up in Haiti, the Africans that were kidnapped from the West African continent and brought to Haiti, the vast majority of them came from the area that was known as the Kingdom of Dahomey. Now, of course, some of them were folks who were prisoners of war. Some of them were folks who were travelers. They were kidnapped, remember? They didn't go to the West Coast and say, get me on a boat and take me over to the United States of America or to Haiti. They were kidnapped. They were stolen. We were robbed from the continent. And so we are still entitled to, their proposition is we are still entitled to our citizenship as Africans. And there are actually African countries who are very anxious to give us citizenship. So I bring that up to bring you back to, here we have KBOKradio.com. Things are happening in San Diego right now. There's doing the Black Business Network event. And NAACP is talking about the Citizens Review Board and police shootings. And Black Health Associates is talking about the Cover California and the Affordable Care Act. And here I am just talking about whatever I want to talk about. But the point is, on KBOKradio.com is the only place you can hear this stuff on the radio in San Diego. Yes, if you get the Voice and Viewpoint, which I encourage you to do, you can find more of this information and even more in-depth information on many of these topics. But if you're not listening to KBOKradio.com, if your friends are not listening to KBOKradio.com, especially on Saturdays and Sundays, and I think, get out of church, get on the radio, listen to the radio. You can watch the game and listen to the radio at the same time, right? And you can cook and listen to the radio at the same. You can barbecue and listen to the radio at the same time. You can vacuum, you can do all those things and listen to the radio at the same time. It's one of the great things about radio. So listen in. Thank you for listening in, but encourage your friends to listen in. Throw it on Facebook, throw it on YouTube, and Instagram, whatever, and let folks know, Twitter, and let folks know that we are here in San Diego talking for Black folks in San Diego. So when we come back from the break, we'll talk about some more in-depth and crazy things because some stuff happens. Stuff happens in church every morning at 9 o'clock that I like to bring in here because and I'm explaining to y'all why I am Kemetic and still go to church. So we will see y'all in a few minutes. Listen to these wonderful statements during the break. We'll be back right after that on KBOKradio.com. Omnilogue One Love radio broadcast with your host, Clovis Honore. See you after the break. Don't go away. What's happening, y'all? Yes, I said that. This is Clovis Honore on KBOKradio.com. Back on the Omnilogue One Love radio broadcast. We say one love because our goal is to get everybody on the same page, loving one another. Now, I know that's very difficult. Even conceptually, that's very difficult because, we just came through, we came through this thing. Yeah, I'll get to the Kemetic thing in a minute. We just came through this election, and this is some of the weirdest stuff that has ever happened to me in my life. I'll be 56 2 weeks from today. On December 4th will be my birthday. And if God willing, we have 2 more weeks on the planet, and because he can't get his finger on the button until the 20th, I understand. So, God willing, I'm still here 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
I'll be 56 years old. And in my 56 years, I have seen some strange things. Some of them drug induced, I confess. But but most of them I've seen on TV. The strangest things I've ever seen are on TV. And it's not on movies like the science fiction and action adventure movies I like. It's real, so-called real life TV. Like this election we just came through is one of the strangest things I have ever seen. I was just reading something. This is what I'm trying to share with you. What I want to do, and when I do a public presentation, back in the day when I was on my own and doing my own thing, when I would do public presentations, I would start with two pieces. The first one is there was a 2-minute segment from the Matrix, where Neo was first introduced face to face to Morpheus, and they come into that room, they sit down in them old raggedy chairs in that old building, and Morpheus starts by saying, "Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you felt it your whole life. You feel it when you go to church. You feel it when you go to work. You feel it when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes," and in the movie they say to turn you into, and they have a copper top battery, right? And what he's implying that you realize later on in the movie is that what you think is happening is not real life. However, what really is happening is you are plugged into a 3-dimensional, full-body video game that is giving you a version of reality that keeps you asleep, so you never actually do what you need to do to unplug yourself from the video game and deal with real life. The problem is that you are a human being. You are a special, unique, extraordinary, fantastic, unbelievable creation that has unlimited capacity to create in this universe and in the universe to come. But as long as you plugged into that pod, you cannot realize this. You are simply a battery energized. You are simply a battery powering a system that is not functioning in your own best interest. That's what I'm trying to get you to see, which is why I bring these things out. And so I bring this one out because I want to try to help unplug you from the matrix a little bit. I was reading a thing. I get a thing called Quartz Daily Brief every day. Now I get Quartz Daily Brief from Africa every day as well. I just started getting that one. I didn't know they had that one. They just told me about that one about a week ago. And one of the things they pointed out was that Donald Trump, somebody interviewed Donald Trump, and he said, "I have never said," no, it wasn't him, it was one of his speakers. And it said, "I have," not the Speaker of the House, one of his people who speaks for him. It says, and he said, "Donald Trump has never said he will create a registry for Muslims." And that's what the guy said. Donald Trump has never, and then the guy goes back and he plays the video where Donald Trump is saying, "I'm going to create a registry for Muslims." Right? And this is the kind of disconnect, the kind of what we call what's the term for it? When you see one thing but you call it something else, it's a psychological condition where you deny the very thing that's in front of you in favor of the thing that you want to be in front of you. Cognitive dissonance, right? Cognitive dissonance is what it's called. When someone stands in front of you and says, I am going to create a registry for Muslims. And then 2 months later you ask him, "Are you going to create a registry for Muslims?" He said, "I never said I'm going to create a registry for Muslims." Right? And then you have to figure out what's real and what's not. Right? And the problem is, because you are plugged into the matrix, and the matrix is connected to your mind, and it knows how to feed your mind the misinformation and disinformation that creates and causes the conflict of mind that creates cognitive dissonance and makes it impossible for you to function and move and act in your own best interest. It is very difficult to move you. So the first one I show is the matrix piece. The second one I always show is by Naeem Akbar, who I mentioned before, and it's called, I think it's called Imaginary Freedom. I always get the name a little bit twisted because he talks about it in a different name. And in it he says that, we've been black folk in this country for a long time, and then we got this thing called integration. And then you get people like Barack Obama, and you get Oprah Winfrey, and you get the NBA and NFL, and you get all these rich people, and you get people on the movies, and you get people in soap operas. And it looks like, if you believe the rhetoric today from what you see being programmed into you by the matrix, if you believe what they're showing you, that black folk doing pretty good. Right? That it's like, what do you got to complain about? Y'all in the movies, y'all got jobs, y'all in the White House, y'all billionaires, y'all running your own companies. But if you look at the objective condition of the vast majority of Africans on this continent and in this country, you find that our material and, more important, physical and psychosocial condition has not improved one whit since 1965. In fact, it has not really improved one whit since 1865. In fact, it really has not improved psychosocially, materially, and physically. Our condition as black people in America, as people of African descent in America, has not improved one whit since 1619. In other words, if you listen to what they're telling you and you are not paying attention to what's really happening, you will think you are better off here and now than you were in Africa. So that's the challenge that you face, is to realize and understand that you have never been, as black people, you have never been in 400 years, in 4 centuries, you have never been better off in America than you were in Africa. Never. That's a fallacy. That's a fantasy. That's your cognitive dissonance. That's the lie they've been telling you. That's you being plugged into the matrix, thinking because you can go somewhere or do something or have something that you are better off. And that's because what they have done more than anything else is stripped away from you your worldview. See, the African worldview is very different than the European worldview. That's why I talk about people in place. Right? Because if Europeans went back to where they were from and they stayed there by themselves, they would have destroyed themselves by now, just like they're trying to destroy. What were Europeans doing? First, they were in caves, right? They say that themselves, that they were cave dwellers. Now, they want you to believe that everybody on the planet was cave dwellers, but the only place that I can find them is Europe. Right? And so here you have these cave dwellers who come out of the Ice Age and they start fighting with each other. But they tried to fight with us, but they couldn't get anywhere near fighting with us. So they start fighting with each other. And as they fight with each other, right, they become better at fighting. And so somewhere down the line, y'all look up Etruscans, Etruscans, Etruscans. And then somewhere down the line, you got this group of folk called the Greeks. Now the Greeks, whenever you read the Greeks, the erudite Greeks, the philosopher Greeks, the mathematician Greeks, the scientist Greeks, you know what they all say? All of them say, well, we found this place called Africa. Yeah. And when we stopped fighting with them and they actually let us come in and talk to them, we found out they had an incredible amount of knowledge and understanding. And so we started studying with them and learning from them, and we built a Greek society from that. Right? We were cave dwellers. We were barbarians. I shouldn't say that because that's an insult to the barbarians. We were cave dwellers. We were crazy. We were wild. We were attacking each other, killing each other, eating each other. Cannibalism is a European thing, right? That's where it really comes from. Not from these islands. Not from African history in the bush. It comes from Europe. And there's very much evidence of that. That's clear if you ever study it. But so they were killing each other and eating each other and then they found these black African people with high culture. Remember, if 2,000 years, okay, so the Greek society came to ascendance began to develop and come to ascendance around 500 BC. Well, everybody, even the Egyptologists admit that the pyramids were built 2,000 years before that. So we're building pyramids 2,000 years before they even have a culture. We're building pyramids. 2,000 years before. We're building pyramids. Y'all listen to what I'm saying. We are building pyramids which Europeans have yet to figure out everywhere, right? All over the planet. We're building pyramids before they even have a culture. And they even admit and say, these Africans are where we got our culture. And then began building culture. The problem is they did not adopt and adapt the philosophy of Africans as they built the technology and developed their philosophy. Right? They kept on with their own philosophy, and it's basically a philosophy of want and need, as opposed to a philosophy of abundance. See, these Africans in the place that we now call Egypt, right? And all along that Nile Valley, they had the Nile River. And the Nile River was a miracle. That's why it was worshipped as a god, because the Nile River was a miracle that was very predictable in what it would do from season to season, and it allowed for the rise of culture thousands and thousands of years ago that fed millions of people, that gave them the leisure to build pyramids and study spirituality in the universe and create science. So that's why these are the first cultures along the Euphrates and along the Nile, because these people had so much abundance given to them from the planet itself, they could kick back for a while and study the universe. Right? So here come the Greeks. And the Greeks are coming from a deprivation because they're coming out of they're coming out of this ice age. And so they've been under deprivation for a long time. And they come out and they're like, we can't afford to be deprived again, even though the next ice age ain't but 10, 15, 20,000 years away. But they're thinking that far in advance because that's just like in coming out of the Depression, our grandparents were like, no, we don't do these risky economic things because we've been through the Depression. We know what happens when you do these risky economic things. So they're very conservative in the way they think about money. Then you got the baby boomers who had abundance because they came out of World War II, right? World War II, the so-called greatest generation, started having babies. They had them in the most prosperous time in American history. The rise of unions and all these good things were going on. And there's a lot of money because we were the only country left on the planet, really, that had the kind of power we had. Europe was destroyed by the war. We had subdued Japan. Russia was still, Russia's always had challenges, but Russia was being insular, created in the USSR, trying to recover from the war because they suffered huge. There were like 10 million people, 10 million Russians that died in World War II. So they were rebuilding. So we were, because we didn't get bombs dropped on us except for Pearl Harbor, right? That was the only attack that really took place on our land. And then if you think about it, our land, let's see, Hawaii, which was stolen by Dole when they called in the U.S. Marines and took the land from there. So that wasn't even really ours either. So if you talk about continental United States, because this World War II was, of course, before Hawaii and Alaska were states. But anyway, long story short, not that I actually have any long stories that I tell short, or I don't have any short stories. But long story short, the bottom line is the Greeks back about 500 AD BC came to ascendancy and began to go out and conquer the world. And they took their philosophy with them. And their philosophy was one of, there's never enough for everybody, so I'm just going to take everything I can for myself and leave you all to your own devices. And if you don't give me what I want, I'll kill you and take it. That's bottom line. That's basically Greek philosophy, right? You can talk about all the erudite things that they talked about. Oh, know thyself, and as a man thing. All this stuff that they talk about that they took from other cultures. But when they went into implementation of philosophy, it was imperialism and domination and colonialism is what they did, right? And even Jesus says you'll know a tree by its fruit. So what did they do? That's what they did. So I have in front of me another book called The Egyptian Book of the Dead. We talked about this last week. I'll read this part to you because it says it in here. And it says about this book, illuminate the journey from unconsciousness to enlightenment through the Book of the Dead. One of the oldest and greatest classics of Western spirituality. And it says Western spirituality. Now, the Book of the Dead comes out of Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. So when he says Western spirituality, we got to question what that means. But that's somebody else talking. What does it say? Illuminate the journey from unconsciousness to enlightenment through the Book of the Dead, one of the oldest and greatest classics of Western spirituality, also known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Now, why is it also known as a Book of Coming Forth by Day? Well, because if you read the title of it in Medu, which is the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, the title of it is the Book of Coming Forth by Day. That's the actual title of the book. That's one reading of the title of the book. So where did the Book of the Dead come from? Well, that's because European Egyptologists, when they went and looked for, when they started robbing graves, right? They were robbing graves of what? Dead people. And so these scrolls were either scrolls in the graves or in the coffins, or these documents this information was written in the coffins themselves, and much of this information also comes from the pyramids themselves. Very few, if any, of the pyramids, I'm not even gonna go there because my reading says none of the pyramids were actually tombs. The tombs were someplace else. But that, get talk about the ziggurats and the not Kabbalahs, there's another word for pyramids that are step pyramids. The step pyramids, some of those were tombs, but that's a whole different. The pyramids themselves are not tombs, but there are pyramid-like structures, mastabas. That's what they are. So a mastaba is just a flat thing, but then you can make a smaller flat thing on top of that one, and the smaller flat thing on top of that one. As you go up, it looks like a pyramid. They call them step pyramids. That's not a true step pyramid, but it is mastabas. Anyways. When the Europeans started robbing graves, they started stealing stuff from dead people, and some of the stuff they stole from the dead people were these scrolls, and so they called them, scroll is a book, and so they called it the Book of the Dead. That's why they call it the Book of the Dead, right? That's why you hear Book of the Dead, because European grave robbers stole them from dead people. That's why they call them book, which is legitimate. They should call it that because that's what they did. They stole them from dead people, the dead people's books. But the actual title of it is the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This profound collection of religious and philosophic teachings offers guidance on securing a future in the life hereafter. So y'all gonna be mad at me if I tell you the Bible is not the only book that gives you information about the future in the life hereafter. But I'll talk about that in a minute. These ancient writings still speak to us today as we search for alternative spiritual guidance. Now there's a question. You see, I have to be careful about how people write stuff. Alternative spiritual guidance. Alternative to what? Obviously alternative to the Abrahamic religions, the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Right? So when we talk about an alternative, we're talking about, here's how you have to be careful. So the religion of the world, the spirituality of the world, for 100,000 years is now the alternative, right? That's like we got one car on Earth, right? And everybody been walking before that, or riding horses, right? And so now that we have one car on Earth, horses and walking are the alternative. Now we've been walking and riding horses for 10,000 years. We've been walking for 1,000,000 years. We've been riding horses for 10,000 years. And along comes this new thing called a car. But the car is not the alternative. The one thing that's different from what we've been doing for 1,000,000 years isn't the alternative. The thing we've been doing for 1,000,000 years is now the alternative. See how people twist that up? That's why you gotta be careful about this whole cognitive dissonance thing, right? Because whoever's writing this is writing it from a white Western perspective. When you say also known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, no, the name of it is the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Also known as the Book of the Dead by the grave robbers. So now the grave robbers get to tell you what the definition of something is going to be. Oh, I robbed a grave, but I don't want you to know that I'm a grave robber, so I'm going to call it the Book of the Dead instead of the book I stole from the dead. Or I'm not even going to give it the name, the Book of Going Forth by Day, because that then implies that there's something positive and value about it, and I stole it. And so if I stole something of value, I'm a thief. And then, okay, we go on from that. Here is a brilliant, okay, I'm sorry. These ancient writings still speak to us today as we search for, again, the alternative spiritual guidance, and they have been embraced by the Kabbalists, Taoists, Druids, Buddhists, and those who search to understand more about why we are here. And if that's what you are as a Christian, searching more about why we are here. Now, if you just want doctrine and dogma, go to any church and take anything they tell you, right? And I won't bother telling you how many different versions. Anybody, have you ever thought about that the different Bibles are called versions, right? Not different translations, right? Because if it's 2016 and I translate a document, then I'm going from these words that mean this to these words that mean this. But that's very difficult to do because you can have a word in Hebrew or a word in Greek. And so what do you translate that word into? So let's say the word, what's the word for big in Greek? So is it big? Is it great? Is it large? Is it humongous? Is it giant? Right? We were having this conversation. I hope y'all did some research. I know y'all not listening, but for my Sunday school class, those of you who are not listening, yeah, for you folks who are not listening, we had this conversation in the class. We're looking at Revelations, and in Revelations chapter 1, we have this conversation about well, it's not in chapter 1, but in Revelations we have this conversation about a new heavens and a new earth. And I challenged them. I said, well, Paul speaks of 3 heavens. In the Bible, in the New Testament, Paul the apostle, who wrote most of the New Testament, says, I knew a man in the spirit 14 years who was carried away to the 3rd heaven. So I said, so which heaven are we talking about in Revelation? So if Revelation says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and Paul said, well, I saw a man, I know a man who's carried to the 3rd heaven. So which heaven is John talking about? See, people don't think about that, right? You let somebody else tell you what that means, right? And you just go along with it because it fits their program. It fits their agenda. But you need to check what their agenda might be. Their agenda might just be for you to fill up the collection plate. Their agenda might be for you to acquiesce when the government says something, all right? I mean, there's a lot of so-called Christian organizations that say, you know, the government is right and we should do the government and the government should be, and it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not even what the book says. So why should I tell the government to do that when the book don't even say for us to do that? So, you know, we just be tripping. But I say all that to say, and it goes back to what Judith Meeks and Renee, there you go. Judith and Renee were talking to the brother earlier today about black people having an inheritance in Africa. But if you only work from a European perspective, a white Western perspective, an American perspective, you won't think that you have a citizenship in Africa, right? But again, I said if everybody were to go back where they came from, then you know where your heritage comes from, and you know what your heritage and inheritance go together. And so you have an inheritance in Africa as a citizen because you were stolen. Right? You didn't migrate to the United States and say, I want to be a citizen. Some of us did. I'm sorry. Okay, that's true. About 5% of us maybe. 95% of us our ancestors were stolen and brought here. They were kidnapped and brought here. And so we have not renounced or given up by choice our citizenship in Africa. So I hear you skeptics talking about, well, I have no way of going back and figuring out what country I came from and where I belong and what my tribe is. Yeah, but have you tried? So I don't know if you're saying something that you have tried and can't do, or are you just saying that because that's what you've been told? You heard somebody else say it, or you're just being lazy because you don't want to try, or you just think you're so happy being an American African and being black in America, and I just already told you, you've never had it as good in America as you had it in Africa. But you don't know that because you haven't studied Africa. There's a brother named Damian Marley. Yes, he's one of the sons of Bob Marley, and you know, Bob Marley is a song you hear at the beginning and the end of, or beginning and the end, coming back from the break. On this show, we talk about One Love, and Damian Marley, he talks about how you only get certain ideas and images about what Africa is all about. And so you always think, I don't want to go back to Africa and them bush people and them wild savages. Like, do you have any idea how many cities there are in Africa that look like Los Angeles, San Diego, and New York and Tokyo and London? Yeah, I mean, you got the same stuff there you got here. Now there are places you can go there that you can't, like you can go to Indian reservation. See, you got Indian reservation out here. You got to remember that the Indian is on the reservation because the white man put him there, right? It was always his land, and actually they've moved a lot of folks too. But you know, the Kumeyaay, for instance, you know, if you go to the San Pasqual tribe or the La Jolla tribe of Native American Indians in San Diego County, you'll go all the way up in the mountains out in Escondido. Well, how did they end up in the mountains out in Escondido? Well, at one point, all the land we sit on, we call San Diego County, was Kumeyaay land. Right before the Europeans got here and the Mexicans came and took some too. After, you know, but that the Mexicans under the auspices of their being transformed by the Spanish, right? Because you know, we have to ask who and what is Mexico? What happened to the Aztecs, right? So again, the Spanish come in here and they change things and they create a country called Mexico, and then they come in as Mexican Spanish persons doing their imperialistic and colonistic thing, and they come here and find people here and they say, we're taking the land, you know, and it started with the priests. You know, so when you go out to San Juan Capistrano and San Luis Obispo and all these other, what do they call them things? Them things, you know what I'm talking about, that the Catholic Church built, then you realize those are the folks who started the migration of Native American people off their lands and into the reservations. But if you go back to Africa, and I have a friend of mine, Nikitam, he was on this show along with Mariemi from the Earth Center. Is on I think he's on the East Coast now, but Mariemi is in Africa right now. If you go into the bush, these aren't the lands that people were pushed onto by Europeans. These are the lands these folks went to or were born and raised in for centuries, right? And so these are wonderful places. And even though they're not the cities, they are definitely villages, and they're not little Tarzan movie villages, right? These are actually cities, but they're traditional cities. Yeah, the missions are what the Catholics established here with Father Junipero Serra. Yeah, Serra High School is named after him. Just like you got, you know, and black folks talk about we need to eliminate things by Robert E. Lee and all them folks. I say, well, you need to eliminate a lot more than that. The Native Americans start with Christopher Columbus. There should not be a Columbus Day where you celebrate the slaughter of hundreds of millions of Native American people. You celebrate this guy who came in any more than celebrating Robert E. Lee, who fought for the continued establishment of slavery and making us stay slaves for another 100 or 200 years, or who knows how long if they had won. So, and now we got Trump. But anyways, I'm trying to introduce you to a different way of thinking. So, because until I get your thinking out of the box, you can't understand what I'm talking about. So here is a book. It's called The Egyptian Book of the Dead is the title of this, because that's what all the European grave robbing so-called Egyptologists gave the name to it. The title of it from the document itself is The Book of Coming Forth by Day, and it is about what happens after you die. And it also talks about what you need to be doing on this side before you die. And I bring that up because, again, in our Sunday school class this morning, we were talking about some of these things. As I mentioned earlier, your own Bible, Christians, your own Bible talks about three heavens. The Bible, you say, is the scripture of God that was written by God himself and given to us through humans. It says, and Paul says, I think in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, he says, I know a man of 14 years who was carried away to the third heaven. Right? And so what do you know about heavens? Right? I mean, you hear this, and that's a conversation we were having because we're in Revelation. So what do you think of when somebody says heaven, right? You have this image in your head that was given to you mostly by Hollywood, and then secondarily by preachers and pastors in the pulpit. Very few of you have read very much other than what you read in the Bible, in the scriptures about heaven, and maybe a few commentaries about that. There's actually quite a bit of information about heaven in the Bible. If you read it, it'll tell you a lot about what's going to happen there and what it's like. But here's the question I raised in the class because a few weeks ago when we started this, I said, well, which heaven is John talking about? And I'm not going to tell y'all. Y'all can go research and figure out which heaven John is talking about, if you can figure it out from the research that you're doing. I said, but I likened it to this. He said, well, here we get to heaven and we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. I said, well, yeah, that's true. I said, but that's just one dimension of heaven. Right? And I say, for instance, so I'll give it to you and so y'all can follow. I know this is difficult, but it's fun. So there's a thing called, so we go into science and we go into math. You know, so everything you see here, think, taste, touch, is based on a three-dimensional model of the universe's existence. Height, width, and breadth, or height, width, and depth. Same thing. 3 dimensions. But 3 dimensions are based on 2 dimensions, right? 3 dimensions is what you would call a cube. 2 dimensions is what you would call a square. But where does a square exist? Well, the square doesn't exist in the real world, in the material world. A square can't exist because a square only has 2 dimensions. In order for you to see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, smell it, it has to have 3 dimensions. A square only has 2. So a square is only a concept. Even when you draw a square on a piece of paper, you're drawing it with a 3-dimensional pencil, and it's actually a 3-dimensional, or ink pen, it's a 3-dimensional existence. It is a representative or a symbol of a square, which is a concept which does not exist in the 3-dimensional world. It is only a concept. It does not exist in the 3-dimensional world because that ink from that pen exists in 3 dimensions. The graphite or lead from that pencil, should be graphite these days, from that pencil exists in the real world, and it is 3-dimensional. So even though you're writing a symbol that looks like a square, you're actually writing a 3-dimensional laying down a 3-dimensional substance that imitates or looks like or gives you the idea of what a square is. And even that doesn't work very well because then you have the thing called a line, right? And a line only exists in 1 dimension, right? Which means that a line doesn't exist. You can't see, touch, taste, hear, or smell a line, right? And a line is an extension of a point. And a point does not exist either because you cannot have a point and experience it in the real world. These are only concepts. So here we have this thing called heaven. And what you get to read in the Bible about heaven is a point. It is not even a line or a square, let alone a cube. And so the analogy I gave to them in the class is like, think in terms of Los Angeles, of New York. Everybody knows about the Empire State Building. And here you have this 100 plus floor building. It's a building with 104 plus floors. It has a water system, it has an elevator system, it has an air conditioning system, and the whole building benefits from all of those systems. The whole building benefits from all of those systems. So in one degree, everything that takes place on the first floor also takes place in the penthouse. So there's no difference between the penthouse and the first floor. Is there air conditioning? Yes. On the penthouse? Yes. First floor? Yes. Is there water fountains, water pressure, toilet and bathroom and all that? On the first floor? Yes. The penthouse? Yes. And every floor in between. Is there an elevator that goes from the basement actually all the way up to the penthouse? Yes. There's elevators. So those things exist in the entire building. So when you're looking at heaven and you look at the representations we have of heaven in the Bible, you're looking at things like there's going to be praise, and there's going to be light, and there's going to be joy, and there's going to be life. Right? So there's all these things that happen in heaven. There's going to be eternal life in heaven. There's going to be other entities in heaven that are not humans. There are going to be aliens in heaven. You call them angels.
You call them angels.
But they're aliens to you, right? They're not humans. They're not of or from the earth. But they're alive and they're intelligent and they have power and they don't even look like you because some of them got wings. All right? So let's think about it. I know I watch Star Wars and Star Trek and Stargate, and we see aliens all over the place, and they have all these different configurations and imitations and aspirations and looking. But look, you don't know what angels actually look like, and you don't know how many different types of angels there are. You know how many we talk about in the Bible? It's about 5 or 7, depending upon who you ask. But how many different types of angels are there that you never hear about? Because why? All you get to talk about, all I hear the Bible, and some you can check me on this if you want to. Omnilogue, OneLoveRadio.com on Facebook, or Clovis Honoré on Facebook. And you can check me on this, but all you get to talk about, all you hear the Bible talk about is the first floor. It might actually be talking about the basement or the garage, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Because the basement and the garage are also served by elevators and air conditioning, right? And electricity, right? So the whole building. But here's the idea I'm trying to get across, the concept that I'm trying to put to you in this context. In addition to, and I'll come back to something else in a minute, all you get to hear about in terms of biblical dimensions, in terms of heaven, is the first floor. And the Bible even says, eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither has entered into the hearts of man. In other words, you can't even imagine what the other 100 floors are like. All you got in the Bible is first floor. You can't even imagine what the other 100 floors are like. Not only that, you don't even know how many floors are in there. Right? So, I mean, and they said, well, how big can it get? I said, see, that's the whole problem. How big is God? Right? How many floors can God put in a building? If God is infinite, he can have a building with infinite number of floors. So you get to floor 1 million, there'll be things that you never thought about on floor 100,000. You start on the ground, you start on earth. And then you go to heaven, the first floor. And you can't even imagine what's on the first floor when you're on earth. So how can you imagine what's on the 100th floor when you're on the first floor? God is infinite. And so you get to the 100th floor and you're like, wow, there's some things jamming up in here that I never thought about on the first 99 floors. Well, there's 100,000 floors. So you can't even begin to imagine on the 100th floor what's on floor 100,000. So you get to floor 100,000, you're like, wow, that was 999,000 floors of incredible stuff, but nothing like what I'm seeing here on floor 100,000. Right? I never even imagined that there could be like this on floor 100,000. Now you find out there's a million floors. Right? It's like, yeah, right? So it's like, but see, what I'm trying to help you do is see and understand and appreciate is what the possibilities are. If we align that's why it's called the One Love radio program, and why I talk to you like this, because I'm trying to align your thinking, because you got some crap to deal with coming up for the next 4 years. And if you try to deal with it from the perspective that's being generated for you by this system, right? Because even the media is now questioning themselves, well, did we create this problem? Like, well, so here come dude from the FBI, right? 2 or 3 days before the election, Trump and Clinton have this debate, and everybody's saying, "Wow, that Trump, he's kind of not with it." But Clinton knows all that she's talking about, and so she comes out of the debate. They're like, "Yeah, she got this." 2 days later, I think it was, here comes this dude from the FBI. Oh, I have more information on Clinton and her emails, right? So what did the media do? Did they say, "Well, wait, hold, dude, what you got? I ain't gonna tell people about this till I know what you got." Right? I want to know if there's some truth to this, some fact to this, some reality to this. Because whatever you say is going to have a huge influence on the election. So I can't just put some BS out there. Did the media do that? No, media says, chomp, let me swallow this whole hook, line, and sinker. Right? And so every single news station in the country is now saying, oh, there's new stuff about her emails. So what happens? And we watch the polling, and we watch what's happening, and so there comes down her lead. It comes down, until now it's neck and neck. We don't know what's going to happen, right? So the media feeds on this kind of crap. Oh, now we got something to talk about. Oh, now it's a dog race. Oh, now it's a horse race. No, dude, it's a rat race, and you helped to make it a rat race, right? So did they stop and say, no, we shouldn't be listening to what this dude's saying until we can vet it out? No. And then what happens? 2 days before the election itself, oh, I'm sorry, it ain't nothing. It wasn't. It was just a joke. We didn't really have nothing on Clinton. We ain't doing nothing different than we was doing before. I'm sorry I said that. I shouldn't have probably said that when I said that. Right? Right? It's like, oh, wait a minute. He may be culpable. I was gonna say idiot. He may be culpable. Right? If he may be, we may want to hold him responsible for saying the wrong thing. But see, if I'm sitting here in a radio station and the mic is turned off and I say something, only Fahim gets what I'm talking about. He's the only one who hears me, right? And if he says, oh, this dude's a crazy fool and I ain't telling nobody about this, nobody else on the planet knows what I said, right? But if the mic is on and all 6 of y'all listening, well, however many of y'all listen. we really don't know how many of y'all listen. We're going to get to that, though. But if I turn on the mic and now you got people listening all over the world to what I'm saying, now you got to figure out who turned the mic on. Phone start ringing, blowing up my phone, all kinds. Yeah, so we're like, okay, who turned the mic on? Right? So the media turned the mic on, and that's why we had this situation. So they're asking themselves, and so that's why I'm trying to get you to see there's a whole lot of stuff matrix going on around you. All the media that you can access is 99% matrix. So you got to access enough media to figure out the 1% between 100 of the different pieces of information so you can have one whole thing. 99% of what you get in the media is matrix. 99% of what you get in school is matrix. 99% of what you're getting on your job is matrix. 99% of what you're seeing on television generally is matrix. Now, here's the interesting thing about the matrix in the last 3 minutes before I get out of here, and that is this. They have to use the truth before they twist it, right? They don't twist a lie to make it a lie. They twist the truth to make it a lie. So the question is, can you figure out how to untwist the lie they're telling and get the truth out of it, right? Because they can tell you the sky is falling, but in order for you to understand it, they got to tell you what the sky is. They can tell you that the earth is quaking, but you have to have an earth to quake. And if they can't tell you what the earth is, they can't tell you the lie about the earth quaking, right? They can tell you they're going to we were talking about this last hour, undo Obamacare. But if you don't know and understand how Obamacare is constructed, what it really is, right? Then you can't know what they're trying to undo. So when they say undo it, they might just mean something small. And you're like, well, it didn't undo Obamacare. No, they just made it impossible for you to get it. Right? And that's so did you think about that? Right? And they didn't do it until the middle of 2017. But what did you do? I didn't register it. I didn't sign up for it in 2016. So I didn't have it in 2017. So by the time 2018 came along, they had changed the law. Now I can't get it. Right? So this is what I'm talking about, and untwisting the lie that they're telling and getting out of the matrix. And so that's why I share with you things like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, as they call it, or the Egyptian Book of the Book of Going Forth by Day. So you can see that there's a different perspective out there than the one you keep getting fed in the matrix. So you can begin to untwist the lie so you can see the truth. Because when I begin telling you the truth, you don't believe me. For instance, I'm going to make this commercial presentation and see how much trouble I get with the FCC. So I work for a company called Grid Alternatives. And my Grid Alternatives literally puts solar systems on people's roofs for free. In other words, you can get a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 solar system installed on your house for free if you, 1, own the house, 2, live in the house, and 3, if you meet the income guidelines. You can't be too rich for this. If you got that kind of money, go buy one. But if you would like to have a solar system on your house and you can't afford it, you might want to go to the website Grid Alternatives, GRID Alternatives, and find out if you qualify. Not only do you get a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 solar system, it generates enough. It's designed to generate enough electricity so that you will pay zero for your electricity usage for every year. So if you're paying $200 a month for electricity, that's almost $2,500 a year. And over the 25-year lifetime of this system, that's something like $70,000, right? 20 times 24, like $50,000, right? So I can and that's at current rates, which are typically going to go up. If you look at the rates over the last 25 years, you'll know that you're paying more for electricity now than you were 25 years ago. So our estimate is that one solar system can be worth $100,000, and it costs you nothing. And but my problem is people don't want to believe that because they've been told so many other lies by so many lies by people and so many half-truths by people. They've had the truth twisted for them so many times, they don't believe the truth when they hear it. So I'm trying to wake you up, open you up, and I'm going to do some more even radical things next year, but I'm just gearing you up for what's coming your way, not just from me, but from the whole world. So again, this is Omnilogue One Love Radio program on KBOKradio.com. We'll get everything straightened out with the website by next Sunday, and you'll be able to pick us up on the right place at the right time and hear what we're trying to say. But open your mind, broaden your thinking so that you can hear things that are being said for what they are and not just for what people want you to think they are. Don't get stuck in a matrix and just do what you're told. Learn what the truth is and do what you're supposed to do, because that's where true freedom reigns. So thank you again for tuning in to Omnilogue One Love Radio here on KBOKradio.com on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I think it might be raining by now outside, which is okay with me because I took care of my yard and got the rain stuff all set up. So I appreciate you listening in. Y'all beautiful, wonderful, extraordinary, fantastic, and magnificent. And you will always be. You just got to make sure that the light that you let shine so that people can see. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll check you out. Okay, so I need to let you know we're going to be pre-recorded. It's not a copy. We pre-recorded next week's show, but it's not a copy. You've never heard that show before. So you need to tune in next week and listen to that show as well. And then we'll be back on the air probably on December 4th, because that's my birthday. I'll see y'all in 2 weeks, but listen up next week because it's good stuff. I love y'all. This is Omnilogue One Love on KBOKradio.com. Clovis Honoré signing out and seeing you. I'll see you in 2 weeks, but listen next week too. And y'all give some shout outs and praise to Al and Tayati and Fahim and all the rest of the staff over here at KBOKradio.com. Love y'all. Peace. Bye.